The following episode contains material that may be uncomfortable, upsetting, and unsuitable for some audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Scott Peterson is now sitting in a California prison after he was convicted of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn son Connor in 2004. He was sentenced to death, locked away at San Quentin, and for millions of people across America, that was it. Case closed, justice served, story over. But was it? Not exactly. Nearly 2 decades later, the story of Lacey and Scott Peterson is still unfolding. Not in a courthouse filled with cameras and crowds, but in quieter hearings, legal filings, and new investigations that raise a far more unsettling question. What if I told you the jury never heard the whole truth? What if I told you that key evidence was left out? Witnesses were discouraged or outright ignored, and a key juror who hid a dark personal bias. And what if, after all of these years, the real story hasn't been told? Welcome to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Every week, I deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators and the eerie places where dark stories still linger. In this episode, the final installment of the 3-part series, The Peterson Files, titled What the Jury Didn't Hear, we'll walk through the cracks in the investigation, the witnesses that the jury never met, evidence that vanished, and the juror now accused of deception. Most of all, we'll examine the question haunting the case today. Did Scott Peterson really receive a fair trial? In episodes 1 and 2, we follow the heartbreaking disappearance of Lacey Peterson, the search that gripped a nation, the discovery of her and her baby Connor's remains, the media frenzy, and Scott's 5-month trial, one of the most sensational in modern American history. But high-profile trials are more complicated than the headlines suggest. And once the cameras packed up and the courtroom emptied, the Peterson case took on a second life, this time in appellate courts. Investigative reports, and legal challenges that cast doubt on what the jury actually heard. Because for almost 20 years now, experts, journalists, defense attorneys, and even some of the original jurors have admitted there were holes. Big, big holes. Some came from sloppy investigative work. Some came from tunnel vision, some from mistakes, and some from things that just simply don't add up. This episode is about those cracks, the parts of the story that the jury never heard and the public was never meant to question. Now, when Lacey first went missing, the Modesto Police Department was flooded with tips, hundreds of calls over just a few days. Most were routine, but several were not. Some came from people who knew her, some came from people who didn't, and some came from neighbors with clear views of the neighborhood. Yet many of these callers reported the same thing. They saw a very pregnant woman walking a golden retriever after 10:30 a.m. at a time Scott Peterson had already left the home. Now let's break this down. The prosecution built their entire timeline around one assumption. Lacey was already dead before Scott left the house that morning. But multiple neighbors claimed they saw her alive after he had driven away. Now, these sightings weren't vague. They weren't anonymous. They weren't inconsistent. They were detailed. They were specific. And they were consistent with each other. One neighbor, Vivian Mitchell, swore under oath that she saw Lacey walking Mackenzie near La Loma Park around 10:45 a.m., a pregnant woman wearing a white top and black leggings, just like Lacey. Others reported a visibly pregnant woman being pulled by a golden retriever along neighborhood routes that Lacey frequently walked. Even people who didn't know her described her dog, her gait, her clothing, her size perfectly. They all reported the same outfit that Lacey was last seen in. Both people who knew her and people who didn't described Lacey and her dog, Mackenzie, to a T. But these sightings were never introduced at trial. In fact, some of the witnesses said that police told them, very bluntly, that they didn't even see Lacey. No, we'll look into it. Not, we'll verify the timeline. Just flat out dismissal. Why? Because their accounts didn't fit the prosecution's theory. Police believed Scott's timeline, and so the narrative was locked in. Lacey vanished before he left. In one of the earliest, clearest examples of tunnel vision in this case. But if these witnesses were right, if Lacey was alive after 10:30 a.m., Scott couldn't have killed her like the prosecution claimed. This one always baffles people. Lacey and Scott's mailman testified that Mackenzie, who always barks at him every day without fail, was not barking at him when he delivered the mail that morning. Now, this suggests that Lacey was most likely home because Mackenzie barked when he delivered the mail and Lacey wasn't home, but if Lacey was home, he wouldn't bark. But again, the jury never heard this. The jury never got to weigh this account. Let's get started with other evidence the jury never heard, beginning with the burglary across the street, one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Now, on December 24th, 2002, the very day Lacey disappeared, the Medina family home directly across the street from the Petersons was burglarized. Several witnesses reported seeing men outside the Medina house that morning, removing a safe and loading it into a van. One witness even said that they saw Lacey walking Mackenzie around that same time, and one even stated that they saw Lacey approach the men. The problem? Well, police insisted the burglary happened on December 26th, 2 days after Lacey had gone missing. Now, the burglars were eventually caught and claimed they had nothing to do with Lacey, but they did later admit into breaking into the home on the 24th, just like the neighbors originally said. Despite this, detectives never connected the burglary to the homicide. They didn't even consider it. So, was Lacey potentially alive after Scott had already left for the marina? And if so, could she have confronted the burglars? This theory, possibly a crucial alternative explanation, was never fully explored at trial. And then there was the van. Not long after Lacey disappeared, police discovered a burnt-out van abandoned in Modesto. Inside, they found a mattress stained with blood and later confirmed human DNA. Now, the van was close to where multiple witnesses reported seeing a pregnant woman being forced into a vehicle. Yet, authorities did not link it to Lacey. They did not submit it into evidence during the trial. They did not fully test the mattress. They did not release DNA comparison results. They simply said it wasn't connected. But how would they know if they didn't even have it fully tested to confirm whether that human DNA or blood was not Lacey's? The Los Angeles Innocence Project, who have taken on Scott's case to prove he was wrongfully convicted, has pushed for expanded DNA testing on several pieces of evidence from the case, most notably the burnt out van with the bloodstained mattress. Now, the crazy part, in May of 2024, a request to test the entire mattress along with other pieces of evidence was rejected. The judge approved testing for only a piece of duct tape found on Lacey's pants. All other testing requests, including the mattress and other van related items, were mostly denied. Now, this kind of baffles me because why on earth would a judge be against testing items that could possibly exonerate Scott Peterson? Experts said that this is the first and only time they have ever been denied testing in any case. And that, to me, is more than a red flag. That's a whole flare gun. Now, another piece of the puzzle. In 2003, another piece of evidence went missing: a watch. Lacey's watch, to be exact. The watch identified by her family. It turned up in a pawn shop after she disappeared. Police retrieved it from the pawn shop, took the information of the person who pawned it, documented it, and then the watch simply vanished. No chain of custody, no tracking paperwork, no photos, no official record turned over to the defense. The item just vanished. Cadaver dogs played a large role in shaping public opinion. One allegedly picked up on a scent at the Berkeley Marina, the same place Scott went fishing. But here's the issue: dog scent evidence is notoriously unreliable, and protocols weren't followed, handlers weren't properly briefed, and multiple appellate experts have said that the marina alert should have never been used as evidence, but the jury wasn't told that. Now, I mean, if you're at a marina, you could be picking up scents from anywhere, maybe dead fish, dead animals around. Also, I have heard lately, I actually just found this out, that if there is a woman who is menstruating, they could actually alert on that. And it was because they tried to use cadaver dogs in another case, but because they said that there were so many women living in the home that if any of them are menstruating or if there has been menstruation recently, that actually can be picked up by the cadaver dogs as a scent because it is dead flesh. Now, defense attorneys later said the report was exaggerated and possibly influenced by confirmation bias. In 2020, something came to light, something more explosive than any piece of physical evidence: juror misconduct. Specifically, juror number 7, Rochelle Nice. At the time of jury selection, she filled out her questionnaire, only she failed to disclose something pretty important. She herself had previously filed a restraining order against her boyfriend's ex girlfriend while pregnant, fearing for her unborn child. In other words, she had been a victim in a case involving threats to a pregnant woman, a case similar to the one that she was now judging. That fact, and most legal experts agree, Nice should have never been on the jury in the first place. And some even argue she intentionally inserted herself into the case. Juror number 7's past should have raised a red flag. It opened the door to potential bias. Now, Nice later said that she didn't think her situation was relevant, but in 2022, a California judge ruled that the misconduct was serious enough to warrant an evidentiary hearing. It became one of the central arguments in Scott Peterson's legal team's fight for a new trial. According to her own words in later interviews, she wrote to Scott in prison asking why he didn't save Lacey. She referred to herself as a stealth juror, and this term is exactly what it sounds like: someone who hides their bias to get onto a high profile case. The court held a full evidentiary hearing to determine whether her omission was intentional. The judge ultimately decided that her conduct was problematic, but not enough to overturn the conviction. But to many, including entire legal teams, this was one of the most serious violations in the entire trial. Because in a death penalty case, even one biased juror is enough to invalidate the verdict. Now, I will say that I have been the victim of a violent crime, and I can't actually serve on juries and I think I've basically been exempt permanently, which kind of sucks because I would actually really like to sit in on a jury, like a jury, just to see the process, like in person. But I think that this definitely, it's definitely something that should have been taken more seriously. I think that you most likely could have overturned the guilty verdict with this piece. Now, one of the most disturbing pieces of ignored evidence came from Lieutenant Xavier Aponte, a corrections officer at Norco Prison. Aponte reported he overheard an inmate phone call just days after Lacey's disappearance. In that call, a man referenced a pregnant woman taken by mistake and said, quote, "They didn't know she was so connected," end quote. They also stated that they didn't have anything to do with that pregnant girl going missing. Aponte filed a report and passed it over to Modesto PD. But the officer who took the report said it was not relevant to the direction of the investigation. Tunnel vision, right? It was never followed up on. The guard who reported it reassigned. The tape missing. Then there was Russell Graybill, a neighbor who claimed he saw three suspicious men loading items into a van outside the Medina home the morning of December 24th. Now, this is one of the witnesses who saw the Medina burglary happening. A few days later, Graybill said that he saw two men forcing a visibly pregnant woman into a light-colored van right around the corner, and he believed that it was Lacey. But again, this testimony never made it into court. It was never heard by the jury. In fact, Graybill was told he was mistaken at what he saw. Now, this alone, to me, should have introduced enormous reasonable doubt. Like, so many people are seeing Lacey after Scott had left. So many people are seeing the same thing, and so many people are being told flat out, "You never saw this." It just baffles me that nobody is taking this into consideration and being like, what the hell? Planning a vacation should be just as fun as taking one. And that's where my friend Renee comes in. Renee Monty from Magical Travels by Monty is a professional travel advisor who takes the stress out of planning so you can focus more on making memories. Renee can book any type of travel, but specializes in Orlando destinations like Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando, as well as cruise vacations for every style and budget. From expert tips to personal touches, Renee will make sure your trip is truly magical. Best of all, her services are completely free to you. Renee is actually paid directly by the vendors after your travel. So you get expert planning, insider tips, and personal service without paying one penny extra. So, what are we waiting for? Let's start planning your next adventure. Email Renee at Magical Travels by Monty. That is MONTY at gmail.com. So, since 2005, Scott Peterson's legal team has filed appeal after appeal, arguing everything from tunnel vision, ignored witnesses, missing evidence, illegal juror behavior, ineffective counsel. In August of 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, citing errors in jury selection, unrelated to Rochelle Nisa's situation, which, if there was other errors in jury selection, not even just hers, how is this jury even a valid jury? In 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without parole. That same year, his defense filed a habeas corpus petition arguing that the original trial was flawed, biased, and incomplete, which it was. And the petition included everything: the Medina burglary timeline, witness sightings and testimonies being excluded, the van, the missing evidence, improper juror vetting and misconduct, and questions about the lack of forensic evidence. In short, they claimed Scott did not get a fair trial. Now, this appeal is still under review, and until there is a ruling, this case actually remains legally open. Today, public opinion is still sharply divided. Some still see Scott as the classic sociopath, a liar who killed to escape fatherhood. Others, including journalists who once believed he was guilty, see him as a man wrongfully convicted by a narrative driven media storm and say the case is full of reasonable doubt. True crime podcasts, documentaries, books, and even juror interviews have all added layers of complexity to a case that many considered open and shut. The deeper you go, the murkier the case becomes. Now, one analyst said, quote, "This case is the definition of reasonable doubt. Once you look beyond the headlines, there's a whole lot the jury never heard," end quote. And I 100% agree. Today, Scott Peterson sits behind bars in Mule Creek State Prison. Not on death row, but not free. He's still fighting, still appealing, and still waiting. Lacey's family continues to grieve and believes that justice was done. But for a growing number of Americans, the case has become more than a murder trial. It has become a symbol of how narratives are shaped, how investigations can go wrong, how public pressure influences police, how jurors can be misled, and how difficult it is to undo a wrongful conviction. So let me ask you, is Scott Peterson guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or is this a case we thought we understood, but in reality, we didn't? Now, I have to admit, and I know I'll continue to get a lot of flack for this, I don't think he did it. Um, there is just too much evidence that supports Lacey being alive after he left. There's so many, just everything from the Medina burglary to the phone call between the brothers in jail, just the reports, the police leaving stuff out, the reports being altered, the lying, the omitting, that this just so much. Just there's a reasonable doubt, and you are not supposed to convict somebody if there is any doubt. And I'd probably be that juror where they would hate me because I would be the one who's like, I don't think so. Sorry. Now, I will say, sure, Scott Peterson is not, I can't even call him a good man. He lied, he cheated, and he definitely did some sketchy things during the investigation, but that doesn't make someone a murderer. I don't think he should be sitting in prison while there are people who literally got away with murder because the police tunnel visioned in on Scott, ignored witnesses, lied about the burglary across the street, lost Lacey's watch, refused to test the DNA in the van, basically a biased juror, and absolutely no forensic evidence. Now, Lacey Peterson was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a mother to be. Connor Peterson never had a chance to take his first breath. Their story deserves truth, not assumptions, not shortcuts, not a story built on missing pieces. And whatever your opinion is about Scott Peterson, justice requires honesty. It requires fairness, and it requires facts. As I close this series, one thing is clear. This case isn't over. Not legally, not publicly, not ethically. And we may not have heard the final word. Thank you for joining me for this 3-part series on the Peterson Files. If you found these episodes meaningful or have a new perspective, please follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Share it with a friend. Leave a review. Most importantly, keep asking questions. Also, I ask that if you leave a comment, please keep it respectful. Everyone is entitled to their own perspective and their own outlook. And like I said in the last episode, there are so many horrible things going on right now in the world. I feel everyone should be a lot kinder and a lot nicer to each other. On that note, I will see you next crime. You've been listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where the world of true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Join me every Tuesday as I deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators in the eerie places where dark stories still linger. If you can't get enough of these creepy tales, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, where you can access exclusive content, early episode releases, and bonus material that'll make you sleep with one eye open. You can also grab some Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces merchandise to keep the spookiness close, whether it's a mug for your morning coffee or a hoodie to wrap yourself in on those cold, stormy nights. If you love what you hear, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tell your friends and give a rating to help with that pesky algorithm. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, keep your lights on because you never know what might be lurking in the dark.